Hello and welcome to the Wait I Know You podcast, season 1, episode 2. My name is Nick Rounds and I will be your host. My next guest is the senior project manager of global events at Duolingo. She is the mastermind behind Duocon, Duolingo's yearly user conference that intersects language, learning, and technology. Duocon 2021 featured appearances by Trevor Noah, Sola El-Wayley, and was hosted by Mr. Patton Oswalt. A link to watch Duocon 2021 will be in the description of this video. Katy Romdall, welcome.
Hi,
to
Nick.
Wait I Know You. How are you?
Good. And I know you, actually, so I'm glad to be here.
How long have we known each other now?
I was thinking about that while I was brushing my teeth before this interview, which is kind of funny because we're in different spaces. But I have known you since I think it's December 2004. I think it was like around the holidays that I met you because I was living in Boston at the time and I was back in the Bay Area for the holidays. And I think that is the first time I went to like a house party, college house party, and you were there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been a minute.
Now we're both Seattle people, despite being native Bay Area kids.
That's right.
East Bay represent.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Katy, my podcast is called Wait I Know You. It's a podcast about people that have done amazing things, but they might not necessarily know the person. You work for Duolingo and you're in charge of Duocon, which we're going to get to eventually. But I actually want to start with some of the things that led up to that and kind of just really prepped you for taking on such like a huge event like that. And I think the role that kind of starts you off on that path is Yelp. So before we dive into Duolingo, I want to talk about your early professional career in Yelp. And is it true that you were the very first Yelp community manager of Seattle? Is that true?
No. So I actually was the third.
Okay.
But what's interesting about that is the way Yelp grew their marketing organization and people that became community managers, basically the marketing person on the ground for hosting events, promoting Yelp, getting sponsorships established, writing a newsletter about all the new local businesses that were opening. The way that evolved was through word of mouth. Yelp's growth went crazy. And so when Yelp launched in the Bay Area, it quickly became popular in cities like New York and Boston. And now, of course, living in Seattle too, Seattle is an extension of the Bay Area and Silicon Valley. And so the very next, very natural place for Yelp to pop up and become popular all on its own through word of mouth was all the way back to the West Coast. So it started in San Francisco, then New York and Boston, and then made a beeline back for Seattle. And so it was one of the oldest established communities where there were events and sponsorships and partnerships happening. And so I didn't come on board at Yelp until 2009. And I believe the first community manager came on in 2007. It's a heck of a job and you have to, for lack of a better kind of annoying term, wear a lot of hats. And so the first person that did it totally crushed it, got a promotion and decided to move up into a more managerial kind of regional marketing role. And then the second person did it, crushed it, but was like crushed by it. It's a really busy job. And so she took a different role within Yelp. And then that's where I got the opportunity to take the reins. And it was a job I had actually for many years and really, really loved. So yeah, I was really fortunate to work for Yelp when I did. It was a good learning experience and I'm happy at Duolingo now too.
Of course. It's all about the new hotness, not about the X.
Yeah.
It was such a wild time. I remember visiting your place, and then you had a tiny apartment in Seattle. And the funniest thing in the world is that your storage area had nothing but giant pieces of like Yelp swag. Like it was like packed.
Yep. Nothing personal in there. I don't know if you remember this. This is kind of a funny old school Yelp story too. But I had, in addition to like the chapsticks and all the whatever, swag items that people have specifically at Yelp, there were these, shopping totes, not having to go to the grocery store and get a bag. You bring your own bag. We were ahead of the curve on that 10, 12 years ago. And so we had these kind of like cream colored totes. And they came in boxes of 50 and I'd order hundreds at once. And it was like this big case and it was a standard color from the manufacturer. So it was STD standard and then a tote. So all the boxes said STD cream and they'd come through the leasing office and it looked like I was like buying like a 10-year supply of some interesting product. So yeah, I don't miss the Yelp swag taking up my life.
That's hilarious. Um, so when can you remind me, when did Yelp start in San Francisco? Was like 2000 something?
I believe I came on board 3 or 4 years in. So Yelp might have started in 2004. When
Okay.
I joined, there were only about 200 employees, most of whom were engineers and developers. And then we're still privately held company. So I joined Yelp kind of early days, fortunately. And then I think Yelp went public around 2011 or so. So
Mhm.
a couple years later. So yeah, by the time I left Yelp, I think there was something like 5,000 employees. It was a little bonkers. So big difference from 200 people. It felt like a startup at the time.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And also joining that and taking on that role in 2009, and knowing what Seattle was like in the early aughts as well. Can you kind of describe what the restaurant and event scene felt like around that time in
Yeah,
Seattle?
I mean, 2007 was a great time for some growth in Seattle because there had been sort of this economic lull and kind of downturn for a couple of years. And so leading up to 2008, 2009, because 2007 was when it started to dip. I even lost a job I had here in Seattle, and that's when I ended up at Yelp. But yeah, things were really picking up, and people were doing well, and so people were spending, money that they could spend on going out and experiencing new bars and restaurants. And it seemed like there were all of these incredible local restaurateurs and entrepreneurs opening one business after the next. Linda Dershang is a good example. She's somebody that had like one or two spots, ended up with 6 or 7. Renee Erickson, another female entrepreneur restaurateur here in Seattle, she was expanding her empire from 1 to 2 to 4 to 5 restaurants. And so there was a really cool opportunity when I started at Yelp to sort of discover the city and kind of learn about what these establishments were that had been around forever, that were great old classics, and then also discover all the new kind of hot places that were popping up. Thanks to, for better or worse, there's a lot of tech people in Seattle, and they can afford to go out to eat every night of the week, and they want something different. So yeah, I got a really cool opportunity to, as someone that had only been in Seattle for a few years, have a job where I was paid to like discover the city and genuinely know about all the new businesses. And that includes, like retail stores and boutique stuff too. So not just bars and restaurants, but that made up the majority of it because we certainly eat a lot more often than we do things like buy shirts and shoes. So.
Right. So in addition to sampling the city, as it were, you also planned events for Yelp Elites, which is kind of an evolution of your job beyond just community management. Can you talk about what all that involved and some of your favorite things from that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Yelp Elite members, these people that kind of apply for or get invited to this sort of inner circle, as it were, it's like a community within a community. These are folks that Yelp identifies as influencers, for lack of a better term. And these are people that you can see through the activity they're using on Yelp. They're using Yelp like a lifestyle blog. And so they're literally telling Yelp and other business owners and people all over the world where and how they spend their money and how often they do it. They're taking photos of every meal, that they eat, or every plate that comes out. They're taking pictures of all the cocktails they're drinking, and they're really kind of talking and boasting about the lifestyle that they have. And they're also usually offering really important details. Yelp Elite members actually tend to be overwhelmingly positive on Yelp. They're not encouraged to be dishonest. They're not encouraged to give good reviews in exchange for anything that actually would cause the person to like lose their elite status. But they're encouraged to be honest. And people that are like going out all the time and having fun tend to just have a good time when they go out. They tend to be people that go into a business and say, what did I like about this business versus what did I dislike,
Right.
So anyway, yeah, I got an opportunity to start planning events for Yelp, and these were promotional events, and we'd invite these Yelp Elite members. And basically the idea is you find a new business or a popular business in Seattle that's kind of at the heart of Seattle's kind of like pulse or culture heartbeat, and you engage in conversation with them and say, hey, I'd love to bring in this community of people that love to talk about their favorite places on Yelp. And, they'd love maybe some free samples or like a discount on drinks. And a lot of businesses jumped at the opportunity. And of course, one of the things, just to clarify here too, is that people that attended the event could not review the business as a result of that event because it wasn't a traditional experience. You couldn't go and say, I loved this bar and restaurant because I got like a free slider and a free cocktail, because that wasn't indicative of like your average experience. And so they were not allowed to do that. But the hope was that because we understood that these are people that spend time out, visiting bars and restaurants, is that if their first impression of your place is a good one, they'll come back and be a legitimate customer. And as we know, they're using Yelp, the likelihood that they'll write a genuine review down the line is pretty high. So it was sort of based on this give-get relationship with the businesses. And that was really fun. It was really creative. You had to come up with ideas and ideas for events and themes that would be engaging to people. And the goal for me was always to plan a party that I would actually want to go to myself. And this was in my like mid to late 20s. So fortunately at the time I was like single and always willing to go out. So planning the parties was fun, but cutting to 5 or 6 years into the job, I was like in a different stage in life and more of a recluse, somebody that was like cozier at home. So I sort of I outgrew the role, but I'm really appreciative. It was such a creative job while I had it.
And your life is very, very different now, as indicated by the tiny kitchen right behind you.
I know. Yep. It's not about me anymore.
Do you have a particular theme that you're really proud of that you for the parties that you threw?
This one is top of mind because I just mentioned it the other day. We're doing like a Halloween party at Duolingo here in our Seattle office, and people were talking about their hesitancy in some cases to wear costumes. It can be kind of embarrassing. People are like into Halloween or they're not. And I actually, funny enough, working at Yelp and being somebody that hosted themed events, I'm not a big Halloween person. I'm not a big dress up for no reason person either. Like Halloween, at least there's a reason. Like most of the people, at least in this country, get involved and dress up. But I think this came up the other day. So we had what was called a P party. And it's just the letter P. Don't get dirty here. And the idea was come dressed as anything that starts with the letter P. So it's super, super open-ended. And some people that were shy were like, I'm a person. I came as a person. Look, I'm not into the theme. Some people cheated a little bit and like had a lanyard with their like cell phone hanging from it. And they're like, I'm a paparazzi or paparazzo. And then other people got crazy. And there was this one gal, we had a costume contest. She came in a custom made, like she'd spent 2 weeks making a pastrami sandwich. And she showed up like as a sandwich and she won. But there's like penguins and pimps and pirates and who knew? There's so much diversity in that. So I thought that was really fun because it was so open-ended.
That's awesome. Do you have any other favorite anecdotes or experiences from that job, from your time doing that?
I mean, you just had to hustle. I remember one of the biggest things I ever did, which is unheard of, I think, outside of Yelp, is I hosted an event single-handedly, planned the event, coordinated all of the vendors, all of the sponsors, all of like every moving piece of this event, found the venue. And I always did that for every event for Yelp. But this was an event that 1,200 people came to. And I was the only person. Like you never hear of like even large scale weddings. There's like a small team of people that execute those. Even at Duocon now, I have a big job with a lot of moving parts. And it is not really a team of one. So that was really memorable. Like having 1,200 people show up to something that you single-handedly planned is a little bonkers.
Yeah. And it sounds like that really laid the groundwork for you in terms of just like letting you know what you're capable of, and just saying like, I got this, I can do this. I've done this before.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't even really know kind of what my strengths were. The reason I was drawn to Duolingo is I have a background I'm fluent in Spanish. My first job in Seattle was actually exclusively in Spanish. I had customers that I talked to. I was a sales like regional manager for a board game company. I talked to people in Belize, in Costa Rica. I talked to people in the Dominican Republic all the time on the phone. I was writing emails and sending tweets in Spanish. And so that was like my real interest with Duolingo is there's a community, like a strong community element that's not dissimilar to Yelp's, but it's a brand that I like more now that I'm a little older. I'm not a big fan. I haven't used Yelp in like 5 years. Nothing against the product. It's great. It's super useful for so many millions of people. But I just heard about an opportunity at Duolingo and I was like, that has the community experience I like, but also has a language component that is like that I'm personally really interested in. So it was like a really awesome transition.
Well, I guess, I mean, jumping ahead a little bit, and I guess we can just talk about Duolingo now. Can you expand on like what role language has on your life specifically, and like how important language is to you?
Yeah, I don't even know if you know this, Nick. So for me, I mean, right as my earliest memories, I can remember my dad always using like Spanglish or speaking Spanish in our house. And my dad, born and raised in the Bay Area, doesn't look too dissimilar from me, red hair and blue eyes. But he, I don't even really know the history of it now. So he would be 76, 77. And when he was a teenager, remember, pre-internet, like literally writing letters and paying for very expensive long distance phone calls, he went on a trip to Mexico and he stayed with a family for a summer that had two sons that were, my dad's like 15 and one of them was 16 and one of them was 14. So he lived with this family for like a whole summer and they stayed in touch and were friends and basically kind of became like cousins or brothers. And over the course of many years, my dad went into the military and pharmacy school and he, established a career and owned some businesses in the Bay Area, busy guy, but he still always stayed in touch with these guys he was friends with in Mexico from when he was a teenager. And so that wasn't super clear to me. That's how I knew he knew Spanish. And he used it, of course, in the pharmacy world. It's extremely important in the Bay Area to know Spanish if you want to help your customers. And so I didn't really understand how that all tied in. But when I was about 12 years old, and this was genius of my parents who had 3 kids, was my parents were like, so you're going to Mexico this summer. And they just like put me and my twin sister and my older brother on an airplane and like shipped us 2,000 miles south to go to Mexico for the entire summer. And we lived with this family, one of the brothers, as it were, that my dad had met so long ago. And they were immediately like family to me. So I was like 12 years old. So between the ages of 12 and 18, I went to Mexico like 40 times. I even stayed for a year and a half to do like a summer and then university year at school, like an academic year at school. So I always had like Spanish like peppered into my life as a kid. And then as I got older, I participated in my own exchange and I stayed in a different state with a different family and made my own friends in Mexico. So then I knew 2 families in 2 different states. So I just spent a ton of time in Mexico, and knowing another language was empowering and fun, but it was also extremely useful right out of college where you're competing with a lot of other people and like you don't have much in common with anyone that's 21 other than like your resume is really damn short. And so speaking fluent Spanish was exactly the reason I got like my first job out of college, and it ended up being here in Seattle. So yeah, language has been super important. It's important to my dad and important to me.
I'm always amused when somebody hears you speak Spanish for the very first time and seeing the reaction of you actually having a damn good accent. Because you're what would you say your Mexican accent is, or your Spanish accent is rather?
So I have that horrific like disease, I guess you can call, where you meet people and you don't like, maybe they're like, I don't know how to describe it, but people like learn accents really quickly. So like if I go to London for 7 days, I will embarrass the shit out of you because I will accidentally be inserting like an accent that I hear. It's just so weird when someone says a word directly to you and then you repeat it back in your own accent. It almost sounds like you're correcting them. So anyway, there's some kind of, I don't know, it's not really a disorder, but there's like a type of person, and they're deemed annoying, but they're a type of person that can like really pick up accents. And so my accent is a little muddled now, I think, having not lived in Mexico for a while. But for the most part, my accent is Chilanga. It's like Central Mexican or Mexico City accent. It's the accent you see a lot of times on like Mexican TV. It's sort of like, I would consider it the like California accent of Mexico. Like Californians, we all say don't have an accent. It's like that.
We don't have an accent, but we do the second we have to start saying the word hella.
Right. Yeah. Well, so recently I was in Pittsburgh and a coworker of mine on the marketing team that lives in Mexico. I had never like dropped that you tell people Spanish and they're like, sure, redhead, I get it. And so I had never really told her that I really do know Spanish. And so I just happened to like slip a sentence or two in Spanish, and she just like almost dropped the drink that was in her hand. She was like, wait a minute. And then she asked me if I wanted to do an interview about Duocon on like live Mexican TV. And I was like, 20 years ago, yeah, but I think I could do okay, but you do lose some of your fluency by not using it. So my accent has remained, but my ability is I speak like, high school ability Spanish as opposed to, my English is better.
Sure. Do you remember what you said to her?
I don't remember. But yeah, it was just like a funny, I don't remember really clearly enough to say, but it was just something about like, I used to live in Mexico. And she's like, what part? And then I just said, oh, viví en San Luis Potosí y en el DF o Mexico. And she was like, what? and then she was asking me like where I've been. And that's another kind of interesting tidbit is Mexico has 31 states and I've been to 30 of them.
Oh,
so
wow.
I've seen more of Mexico than I have of the US. And everyone I ever talked to was like, that's more than me. So
what's the last state that you haven't been to yet?
I have not been to Chihuahua.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I haven't done a lot of, it's a border state, so I haven't actually been there, but I haven't spent a lot of time in like Texas or anything either. So
I work out of Texas.
That's right.
And yet I've never stepped foot at my job. Go figure. The joys of having a job during quarantine.
I was to say the pandemic might have something to do with that.
No kidding.
I hear small people, so I apologize.
No, you're good. Are they going to be okay?
Oh yeah, they're absolutely fine. They have a dad, and he's downstairs with them.
Okay. I didn't know if Jim was there or not.
Yeah, he's here.
Oh, awesome. Before I go super deep on Duolingo, I want to talk about the job that you had right before Duolingo, which is Novo Fogo, which is again related to the joys of international stuff. And I guess to start, for the uninitiated, what is Cachaça?
Yeah, so Cachaça is, and people could dispute this, but for the purpose of kind of dumbing it down and simplifying it, Cachaça is a cousin to rum. It's nearly identical to rum. It is a spirit that's made from sugarcane, except for the most part, most everywhere in the world, when you make rum, there's a different step where you're actually using molasses, which is a byproduct of sugar. So they're both like sugar-based spirits, but the way Cachaça is made is different. And it's sort of, I guess it's like fresher because there's that one step missing. It is just fermented sugarcane that becomes distilled. And so there is one other place that distills a spirit identical to Cachaça, and it is in Martinique, which is a little island. And so their spirits are like, if you did a taste test, they're crazy, crazy similar. There's a very natural kind of earthy vegetal taste, which vegetal is sometimes the wrong word because people think it's going to taste like actual vegetables, but it just has like a grassy brightness. But really what makes Cachaça is not just how it's made, but the fact that like it has to be made in Brazil to be named Cachaça. So you could make Cachaça in the United States, but you wouldn't legally be able to call it that. You'd have to call it rum.
Otherwise it's sparkling rum. Yeah,
exactly. I worked for a company called Novo Fogo for a couple of years. And the funny tie-in there is the board game company that I worked for, that I moved to Seattle for in 2007. They were Brazilian based. And so my coworkers all spoke Brazilian, Portuguese, and Spanish. And then I spoke Spanish. So I picked up some Portuguese there. So the opportunity to work for Novo Fogo, I was like, trips to Brazil, very cool. I could brush up on some of my Portuguese, very cool. So there was that language cultural component that I thought was really interesting. And I think he was my husband at the time. I don't remember now. But the guy that I share a home with, boyfriend, husband, he, baby daddy, he was in the spirits industry. And so I thought, oh, that's a really cool tie-in. Like we would have, I was always going to liquor events and things with him anyway. And so I was like, I could work for a liquor company. And so I worked as originally the director of marketing, but it was a really, really small company. So I kind of gave myself that title, but looking back as I've kind of grown and matured and evolved as somebody, as an employee, I wasn't doing much directing. I loved that company and their product is outstanding, but it was a steep learning curve and it just wasn't for me at the end of the day. So yeah, I worked for Novo Fogo and it was cool. It was a great experience.
Yeah, I'd have to imagine that going from, just getting into the liquor business period and just retail in general must feel like a completely different beast. Is there any other ways that role really challenged you and just kind of like put you out of your comfort zone?
Yeah, I mean, I was really lucky with, obviously it depends on who you talk to when you say you work at Yelp. If people, it's like a 50-50 split between a consumer that's like, I love Yelp, and then a business owner that's like, I hate Yelp. And and that became, more common as an experience. The longer Yelp has been around, the more pervasive it is, like the more people know about it, the more its reputation has changed over the years. So when I first started at Yelp, it was amazing. Like everybody thought Yelp was like the coolest new thing since like sliced bread. So I think one of the struggles with Novo Fogo is I was like totally sold on the product, totally sold on the fact that it's like a boutique spirit, that it's made in such an interesting and beautiful country, that it's an organic spirit, that it's kosher. I mean, it's like all alcohol is poison, but if you're going to poison your body, there is sort of a hierarchy. And this specific cachaça, Novo Fogo's cachaça, is like, that's a good one to go with. And so I was really proud to work there, but it was also a really difficult sell. And I mean, for like marketing and social purposes, in addition to like literal sales, which is not a department I work in, but you try to upsell people like, hey, I want to have an event with you. I want to have a cachaça event at this bar or this golf club in Texas or whatever. And people were excited about it, but you don't see a huge spike in sales because Americans we are so far away from Brazil. Brazil is very far away. We don't know much about Brazilian culture broadly. If you poll Americans, most Americans will think that Brazilians speak Spanish. We don't know enough about Brazil. And so to ask people to drink a new spirit that they've never heard of is a big ask because everybody already knows tequila and rum and vodka. We're very familiar with that. And so encouraging people to drink this like expensive organic spirit from a country they don't know about, and it has a tricky name, cachaça, because it's spelled like cachaca. Yeah, it's just too intimidating for people. And so that was a bummer. I went from working for a company that was super recognizable to a company where I'm like having to constantly convince people that this is a great product, because it was, but they just didn't know. And so now I'm back on that side again where I don't encounter a lot of people that say, oh, Duolingo sucks, people love it. And I feel good about that because it's, now that I work there and I'm on the inside, I can tell you like people should love it. It's a fantastic company.
You said something really interesting about how most Americans don't know much about Brazilian culture. Is there something in particular or things in particular that you think are really fascinating about Brazil or Brazilian culture beyond cachaça?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot about Brazil. I mean, when you think of Brazilians and even people broadly from Latin America, they're people with huge, huge hearts. You can meet someone on the street corner. People think Americans are nice. No, you meet someone in Brazil at the airport or on a bus, and they're like inviting you to their house to have a barbecue, and it's a legitimate thing. People are just beyond friendly. But the other thing that's really different about Brazil is there's a ton of European influence that you don't see as much of in Mexico. So that's really interesting. There's so much socioeconomic and racial and cultural diversity in Brazil that I think people don't realize. Brazil is also not a developing country. I think people think of it as an impoverished country. And of course, there are favelas and there are places in Brazil where there are poor people, but that's not dissimilar to so many countries in the world, just like the US. But I walked around Sao Paulo at 1:00 in the morning, and obviously it depends on where you are. It's a big city, but it is not a dangerous, scary city. I was not at risk of being kidnapped. So I think Americans are misguided. They think of a Brazil 30, 40 years ago. Even Mexico, when I was a kid, is different than it is now. I mean, so Brazil is not a developing country. And I think a lot of people also don't know, which is crazy. Don't quote me on this. I heard this a long time ago, thought myself, but more people own cell phones and have cell phones on, data networks, like active cell phones, than they have plumbing in their houses. Like Brazil is a connected country.
Wow.
Yeah. They're a cell phone crazy country. And again, when people think of like Latin food, Brazilians do not eat spicy food, for example. The cuisine is completely different. It's a lot of fresh fruits, a lot of fresh vegetables, a lot of steak. But yeah, no spice. So like tacos and stuff, that would be at a Mexican restaurant in Brazil, but the food is super different too.
Yeah, they have access to so many not weird, but just different and unique fruits that you just can't get here at all. Totally. That are just amazing delicacies.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. You go down there and you have like a roadside mango and you're like, what? Like I just ate 5 mangoes at once, all like smashed together. All the fruit and produce is like it'll ruin you for coming back to the US.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean it's like an avocado here versus an avocado in California versus an avocado in Mexico. It's
Have you had a good cantaloupe here, by the way? I have not had a good cantaloupe in Seattle in 15 years.
No, I've never been a cantaloupe person because my mom used to eat like her two favorite like I'm not cooking dinner meals was popcorn and cantaloupe with cottage cheese in the middle, and
But
those
that's
are like my
breakfast.
those are my two least favorite things. Well, I like popcorn. I just don't like cottage cheese and melon like cantaloupe. I'm just those are two things I dislike heavily together.
Well, I'm so down. I'm so down, but I would eat that like before 2 p.m. kind of thing. It feels like a fresh start your day thing and not a like, which is, I mean, that also doesn't really make sense because I don't know if you're familiar with this. You probably are, but in Mexico, so many times when I was living there, we eat cereal at dinner time. You eat a huge meal in the daytime. So the start of the meal, the start of the day meal and the end of the day meal are very similar. So yeah, cottage cheese and cantaloupe would have totally been like a late night dinner, go to bed meal for me in Mexico.
As an adult, I've hardly ever eaten cereal. I ate a lot of cereal when I was a kid, but like when I grew up, I was like, I'm good because I'm never really that starving in the morning. But occasionally, and I'm not a stoner, I will have Cocoa Puffs for dessert if I have like a really strong hankering, just because it's like it's one of the few because I never got sugary cereals growing up at all. Like that was never a thing in my house. It was always like total Raisin Bran, like every cereal that felt and tasted like a punishment is the type of cereal that we had in stock. So I think I had only had Cocoa Puffs one or two times when I was a kid. So to me, like having Cocoa Puffs as an adult for dessert is like an actual treat. I'm like, yeah, this feels like dessert.
That's amazing. That's similar to my husband. Like he's super into cereal that I'm like, that's punishment cereal. What the hell are you eating? Like I ate Kix and now I'm trying to remember them all, but all the crap that now I'm buying my kids as a treat. It's total garbage. There's like zero nutritional value whatsoever, but I've now learned this as an actual parent. When I was thinking about becoming a parent, I was like, here are all the things I'm going to do. And then what you actually do is you just try to get your kid fed. Like if your kid is not going to eat it all, or they're going to have a bowl of crappy cereal, they need a bowl of crappy cereal. I have kids that will protest eating. They're treat motivated. And that's it. They just want crap. And they eat very healthy, by the way, but we try to give them that, that fun stuff. It's a bummer to have to eat like grape nuts when you're 3.
Right. You have to become an adult first, and then you can actually have a soul crushing meal every day instead because
totally
you can't have any fun anymore because anyway, I'm not bitter. All right, going away from my weird complex of like being denied sugar cereal and back to your experience at Duolingo.
Yeah.
Talk to me about what excited you most about taking the role at Duolingo and kind of set up the framework for that.
Yeah. So at Duolingo, I thought, there was a real opportunity to have an impact. So for people that may not be familiar, Duolingo is a completely free product. And of course there's a premium product that we call Plus, but really the only difference is that it's ad free and it comes with a couple other little perks, but the curriculum, what you learn, the levels, what Duolingo teaches you does not change. So if you aspire to learn a language on Duolingo and you're not paying for Duolingo, you still have access to all the same content. So I just thought, working at Duolingo, kind of feeling like if I got involved in the events team or the community team, there's a way to make an impact and I don't know, like join up with, link, or connect our community members. Because what's beautiful about language is, challenge me on this, but like people don't learn language to keep it to themselves, right? It is a social endeavor. People learn language to communicate with someone else. And that could be for the purpose of sharing hobbies. They like the same music, or they're discovering the same magazines or anime, or they're discovering the same movies. And there's a reason to learn the language, and it's to like communicate. So what I thought was really powerful about that is, we could host events or connect our community members with each other outside of the app, because that's why they're learning a language anyway. They want connection. So fostering those connections felt like a really cool opportunity. And it wasn't until I had been at Duolingo for a couple of months, because my role changed a little bit. But it wasn't until I'd been there a couple of months that I really discovered what is my favorite feature about the company. And it's that everyone is experimenting. We are allowed to do and try whatever we want, so long as it is a good idea and it's in line with kind of the broader company goals. And so you're allowed to just dream up something and like try it out. You have a quarter. Okay, fine. Experiment with that. See if there's something behind that. And so when I came on board, I was working mostly in the community team with some events and some teacher initiatives where we're doing things with teachers in classrooms and language events. And then it moved, of course, later into the role that I have now.
And speaking of that, how did the idea of Duocon come about? Like, what are the early the nuggets that led to that?
Yeah, I definitely can't take full credit for the actual idea of Duocon, but at Duolingo, and this is funny now because our marketing team is a lot bigger, but we had like 12 people in the entire marketing org, including our CMO. And so this is 2.5 years ago. We had a brainstorm and we just had these like big, I've probably been to brainstorms like these, but everybody has like Post-it notes and highlighters. They give you all this stuff for the day and they fuel you up with like coffee and croissants. And then you sit around a room and you have like genuine brainstorms and you think about like, all right, if Duolingo were a celebrity, who would they be? Okay, how can we connect some of our users? And people are like spitballing ideas. And so someone raised their hand and said, why don't we have a user conference? Like, why don't we, none of our competitors are doing this. Why don't we put our users under the same roof? These are people that are fanatical about all of our new products, all of our new features, every language course we announce. Why don't we just have a little conference and call it, I don't know, Duocon? And it was sort of born there as an idea that a couple people thought was interesting. And then we got the green light to just test it. We had like 2 months to throw something together. And so I say we because I raised my hand as somebody who was interested in the experiment along with 2 other colleagues of mine. And that's kind of where Duocon was born. Like 60 days later, we had a small little micro event in London, and that was in 2019.
And that was the very first one?
It was, yeah. So it was the first one. The format was pretty different from what it has become for a few reasons, like obviously COVID. Now the conference has been virtual for 2 years. Right. It was all internal. We had an external speaker, but he was a contributor to a course that we have. So yeah, it wasn't the kind of big blow up event that we're hoping that it develops into, and hopefully was a little bit part of this year. But yeah, it was just sort of like, let's see if people would fly around the world to come to this event. And shockingly, we sponsored a lot of people, of course, too. But shockingly, in London on short notice, we had someone come from Guatemala, someone come from Australia, someone come from South Africa. And that's a big deal to like get a visa if needed and pay a lot of money to like fly in for a conference for 2 days. Now it's a free conference, but it's not free to get there if you're not from 20 miles away. So. Right.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but this is more or less the main focus of your job, right? Like you're more or less like planning Duocon 2022 right now, right?
Yes, I am planning it now. So yeah, what ended up happening is 2019's Duocon was really fun, and our CEO came for it, and he was like, "There's something here. Like it's palpable. I can tell that this is something that we should try again." And then of course, COVID hit. So I was planning for an in-person conference in 2020. And right about at the time I needed to pay like an enormous down payment on a venue in Brooklyn, was when I was like, pause, we might not do Duocon at all. And so something really interesting happened where I got the opportunity. Well, after 2019 happened and we got the green light to do a 2020, before we even really knew what it was, before COVID hit, my 2 colleagues that worked on it with me were like, I'm working on a bunch of other projects. And so I am a little too busy to focus on Duocon. So it was sort of like 3 of us were looking at each other and I was like, I'll do it. And so at that time I thought this is really risky because I'm either working on an experiment that will fail and then what's my job, or this will become something. And so I really, put all my eggs in one basket, but I was like, I will volunteer to just do it. And so COVID hit. Then we pivoted and I thought, should we just cancel Duocon? Like, who wants another online event? That sucks. Like, online events are not good. As someone that now plans them. And right. So, but I thought, you know what? Let's meet people where they are. Like, people want Duocon and they're at home. So if they want Duocon, they can wait a year, or we can have it and they can tune in from home. So instead of hosting a 1,000 person event in New York, which was the original plan, we created a conference, pre-recorded it so that we could edit it and really make sure that it was like up to snuff and high quality. And then we aired it live for everybody to see on YouTube and Twitch. And it had 118,000 live views, which is bonkers because we were like, we'll do an amazing job in Brooklyn if 1,000 people come. And we didn't even think about how important it is as a company that's accessible and we provide free products, free educational products for people, that this event should always be online. So now the future of the event, of course, this past year in 2021, or that's still this year, but I'm looking behind because it happened, but we know that the event has to be online. So 2021, it was fully virtual. Again, over 100,000 people tuned in live. We've had like 360,000 people view the content since about 8 weeks ago. So it's like people are paying attention to what we're putting out there, and that's amazing. And I'm like overwhelmed by the interest. But if we revert back to at least a hybrid model, if we have a conference in person ever again in the future, people need to be able to access it from their home. Like we need people that can't get here because of visas, because of a pandemic, because of economic issues, because they work or because they have kids, they need to be able to see the conference from home. So now my challenge for 2022 is 2 events. I'm planning an in-person conference as I attended 2 years ago, but I need to make sure people can watch it from home. So that's where we are. So I'm mapping that out now. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the strength of Duolingo, like as a platform, just the app itself, is that you're learning language like on your own terms and like at your own pace as well. So having the convention be an extension of that kind of makes sense as well.
Yeah. And we're trying to pivot like release schedules, like product releases and things around Duocon too, so that when you tune in to watch Duocon, you're watching interesting external speakers and experts, linguists, authors, professors. You're also watching interesting kind of influential people like your Trevor Noahs that speak 7 languages, like people that we admire and think our community of learners admire. They might have something interesting to say too, so we can give them a platform to share how culture or language impacts changes their lives for the better, like knowing more than one language. So yeah, I hope people tune in for Duocon because they can learn about like what our upcoming courses are, what our new products and features are, but also like let's learn about some other interesting people. We don't have to just toot our own horns for 3 hours. Like let's hear what other people think about language. So
totally. Duocon sounds like a logistical nightmare, or at least at the very least a very daunting task that I think speaks volumes of your personal accountability and your can-do attitude. Can you bring me, I really hate this expression, but can you bring me through the soup to nuts experience of what it means to actually put on a convention, either physical or virtual? Like without obviously exposing any sensitive data, like what do you have to do to put on a convention?
Yeah, I mean, kind of the process for me now, and this could be a different process for anybody, I'm not really sure, but this is the process at Duolingo, is I, wrapped 2021, took some time off, created a whole report, and I did sort of a comparison of how 21 did with 2020. And then I'm in the process of like drafting a high level plan that I want to get approved by our executive team. But that also, I have to like guess what kind of budget we need. Well, I've never hosted Duocon 2022. I've never hosted a conference that's in person that also is a virtual conference because we want the virtual component to be high quality. The last thing I want is for somebody to have like a bird's eye view of a cool conference and think, I wish I was there in person. It needs to be a cool experience virtually because it has been for 2 years. So yeah, kind of understanding the budget. So it is knowing what the project is, dreaming up what's possible, and then working completely backwards, right? Like, so in order to have Duocon happen on June 24th or August 24th or whatever it is, what do I need to place? Like, what do I need to have happen? And that includes like constantly talking with other stakeholders or executive team members at Duolingo about like, what are the products that are coming down the pike? What are the products that are going to be ready to release? What are going to be the interesting things? So I'm like constantly working cross-functionally and engaging with our PR team to discuss like, what do you think is exciting that you know of that's going to be happening in 2022 with Duolingo? And is that something to like put on stage? And then I talk to the product teams. Hey, how's everything going with this product? Where are we on release dates? Is this something that we think is going to be ready by X date? And so it's just like a lot of management of like different teams and different functions. And then the creative component, right? Like finding people to do set design, stage design, finding people to create the little interstitials, all the like little components between talks, all those slides, the hold music, selecting the songs for intermission. There's like a million little pieces. And one of these days I want to get down to like writing every single component in a list, because that would help me. But I have work back schedules basically that are like dozens of pages long of like, all right, on Friday the 12th, I will have to have X done. And then Monday the 14th or whatever, I have to have X done. And it's just like a to-do list that's enormous, months long. But it's fun. It's fun when it's over. That's the best day of my year, is the day after Duocon.
Of course. Well, that's a joke. I mean, it probably feels like planning a wedding, and like the best day is the day after the wedding. You're like, great, it's over.
Totally. And there's so much to get excited about in the planning phase. I mean, you also have to like, you dream really, really big, and then you start to learn about how much things cost, and you're like, okay, well, maybe we'll get rid of this part, and you start like cutting off different elements. And then you still have to be proud with the product. I think one of the most important things when you're talking about planning events, and this is similar to like in-person events I even did at Yelp, is you can't get too buried in the details, because I know what Duocon could have been, all of the intentions I have to like make the event perfect. But you don't. So when you watch it, you're not like, wow, they really missed the opportunity because this and this and this didn't happen. Because you don't know that like maybe I had a plan to have some other big component, but you're only there to witness what's on this side of the curtain. And I'm on the other side of the curtain knowing like what fires I had to put out to make that happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really not unlike video games as well. There's some pretty famous video games where we've had a huge major feature in there that's actually really awesome that just didn't make it to the final thing, and nobody except for the dev team has ever played it. Like in Rock Band 2, Smells Like Teen Spirit was like the third or fourth song that went in there, but it didn't ship with the final game. And there was also a jukebox mode that was in there up until almost when we shipped. And so you would have been able to actually listen to Rock Band and just like have in the background as like party music, and then they yanked that whole feature out. So
and the fans are none the wiser, right? They're not like, I wish this product or feature I never knew existed. So they're not disappointed, but you are, because you knew of the opportunity could have existed. But yeah, once the event actually happens, you're like, oh, it all came together. Or the product releases, you're like, okay, it's still, people are still really happy. So
totally. Do you have any other amazing anecdotes or funny stories from putting on Duocon?
Yeah, I guess I can say this one. This is saved for like an internal blooper reel, but it's not any big secret. When we were interviewing with Trevor Noah, so I flew to LA. He was absolutely wonderful in person. Obviously, of course, he's more attractive in person than he is too. But
of course, that jerk.
I know. He walked in the room and I'm like, really? It's like this guy. So anyway, he walked in. He was absolutely friendly, totally nice. Of course, everyone in the world knows he has a ton of language experience, having multicultural parents. And his father is Swiss German. And I don't know too much about German or Swiss German to have an opinion on the matter, but there is sort of a funny stereotype that people think Swiss German is like an ugly language and it's worse than German and blah, blah, blah. I actually don't know. But there was a minute where Trevor was like dunking on Swiss German and just talking about how like of all the languages he knows, he like hates it and it's ugly. And he just like really like tore it apart. And it was kind of funny. It was humorous. And I know the intentions are good and he's a comedian. But what he didn't know, because he was interviewing or being interviewed by our CEO. Our CEO said, oh, that's amazing. After like 3 straight minutes of dunking on Swiss German. And he said, our co-founder is Swiss German, which is true. So Duolingo's co-founder is Swiss German. And so we edited that bit out of Duolingo because it was sort of like, we don't want to dunk. We don't want to say any one language is better than the other or any one language is like ugly or what have you. But it was also pretty funny that it was like, there was an awkward moment where Trevor was caught going, oh, cool. Like, sorry that I just made fun of a language that your co-founder speaks. So that I thought was super funny.
Speaking of Daily Show hosts, I've never forgotten of Jon Stewart dunking on the Oakland A's and the stadium. There was like I think it was like the anniversary of Occupy Wall Street. He's like, what's happening in Oakland? and it's just like shows like riots and stuff like that, and they're like, doesn't look nearly as bad as the Oakland A's stadium, and he just like goes boom. I'm just like, as a Mets fan, how dare you? Like,
I mean, like we all know the stadium is a big old concrete jungle, but like it's okay with us. It's fine. It's always looked like that. I did not hear that they're trying to rebuild a new one farther, north in Oakland?
Yeah, they're trying to build one at the Howard Terminal, and the city council, as of this taping, approved it, and so I think they're just waiting on the A's to see what's going to happen there. So
that's wild.
There's a chance the A's might stay in Oakland, and I sure hope they do, because as East Bay till I die, if they don't stay in Oakland, I'm not going to stay an A's fan, sadly. So
I know. My brother would, I'm sure, feel the same way. I'm not a big sports person, but he has been a lifelong A's fan, and that's if I've ever seen any professional sport, I've seen more A's games than any other baseball game, certainly, but also probably than any other sport. And then after that would be the Sharks. So Bay Area hockey.
Chomp chomp. Well, Katy, it was an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else you want to plug, or social media sites, cool things happening in your life?
I'm trying to think. I mean, at least with Duolingo, if anybody has not used Duolingo in a few years, you are honestly missing out on a great opportunity. The app has changed so much. We've hired language scientists, people with PhDs, learning curriculum designers, teachers. The app is totally, totally different. And one of the newer language courses that's seen a big facelift recently is our Japanese course, which I've actually been taking the last 6 months. And we launched Stories in Japanese. So if anyone wants like intermediate learning, Stories is a function within some of the Duolingo language courses, Spanish, English, Italian, French, where you can do more listening exercises than just the traditional like plug and play, typing the right letter. You listen to like short stories. So that's one. People should check out the podcast. Our podcast is like world class, and it's in 4 or 5 languages, I think. The Spanish podcast being the most successful.
Is it just a Duolingo podcast?
Yeah. If you were to go just Google Duolingo podcast, you get taken directly to a page, but you can find any of Duolingo's language podcasts on any of the like podcast networks. So you can get them on Spotify, and you can even listen to them on our own website. So yeah.
Awesome.
But yeah, other things non-Duolingo, I can't really think of. But yeah, I guess in COVID, all I can think of is like TV and work. That's my life these days.
That's his life. Well, thank you so much for your time. Everybody else, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks, Nick. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.